I've broken down these details in such a way that they'll leave you shocked. And trust me, you'll only understand the full theory if you watch till the very end. Because what I'm about to show you isn't just another Avengers theory. It's the one mistake that might have rewritten the entire multiverse. Welcome back to MovieCast. I'm Liam Harrison, and today we're diving into a theory so wild, so hauntingly possible, that once you see it, you won't be able to look at Endgame the same way again. This isn't about fan speculation. It's about a chain reaction, triggered by one man's good intentions that led to the rise of another man's downfall. So sit back, grab a drink, and let's walk into the storm that began not with Thanos' snap, but with Steve Rogers' return. When Avengers Endgame closed, we all thought the story had come full circle. The Infinity Stones were returned, timelines restored, and Captain America finally got his long-awaited peace. But that ending, that beautiful bittersweet image of Steve dancing with Peggy, might have hidden a ripple effect no one saw coming. Because when Steve went back to return the stones, he wasn't just closing loops. He was reopening wounds in the fabric of time itself. And in one of those fractures, something slipped through. Something that didn't belong. Now let's rewind to that specific moment. Steve, stepping through the quantum platform, 6 Infinity Stones secured, Mjolnir in hand. He was supposed to travel to 6 different points in history and place each stone exactly where it was taken. It sounds simple, right? But there's one problem. Each stone isn't just an object, it's a force, a cosmic singularity. These aren't things that can just be handed back like borrowed items. They're alive in their own way, and they respond to interference, especially the reality stone. When Steve arrived in Asgard to return the ether, the liquid form of the reality stone, something went wrong. The ether isn't solid, it's unstable matter infused with infinite cosmic potential. In the hands of the collector of Malekith or Jane Foster, we've seen it corrupt, consume, and mutate its host. Now imagine Steve, a soldier from the 1940s, trying to handle that energy with no containment device other than the quantum suit. Even with his enhanced physiology, even with all his courage, he wasn't prepared for what the ether could do when exposed to the quantum realm's temporal radiation. For a split second, as he tried to inject the ether back into Jane Foster's body, the energy flared. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, just a pulse, a shimmer in the air. A temporal leak. The kind of thing no one would ever notice in real time. But in the scale of the multiverse, it's like lighting a match in a room filled with gasoline. And that's where everything changed. Because that pulse didn't just dissipate, it branched. The moment the ether touched Asgardian soil, a small stream of unstable time energy escaped from the quantum channel Steve used. It spilled into a parallel dimension, one that mirrored the original MCU timeline up until that moment, and then began to deviate. In that new branch, the snap had been undone, Thanos defeated, but Tony Stark was still alive. Now here's where things get interesting. Tony's sacrifice in the main timeline was absolute. The stones burned through him, leaving no trace of survival. But in this fractured branch, the leak timeline, Tony survived the snap. The cosmic backlash was weaker because the ether had absorbed part of that energy burst. Instead of dying, Tony slipped into a coma-like state. When he awoke, he realized something unthinkable. He was alive in a universe where he should have died. He remembered the battle, the faces of his friends fading as everything went white, and then silence. He woke up in the ruins of the Avengers compound, broken armor, burnt ground, his chest aching with every breath. No one else was there. The battle was over, but something in him had shifted. He had seen the end, felt it, and yet somehow escaped it. That realization twisted inside him like a knife. Tony Stark, the man who'd once said, "Part of the journey is the end," was now facing a reality where his journey refused to end. At first he tried to rebuild. He sent drones to scan for survivors, but the world was eerily quiet. He contacted the surviving Avengers, but communications were scrambled. Something about the branch timeline made it unstable, echoes, glitches, fragments of reality fading in and out like static. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't in the same universe anymore. Not quite. The sky shimmered differently. Time flowed strangely and his tech registered impossible readings, loops, inversions, fluctuations of time within time. But the moment that truly broke him wasn't scientific. It was emotional. He saw the footage. Security logs from the compound captured Steve's final goodbye. "I'll return the stones," Steve had said. "We'll bring balance back." And then, nothing. No return signal. No follow-up. Tony realized that Steve Rogers had never come back. Not to him. Not to anyone in this reality. The man who'd always preached loyalty, brotherhood, and moral duty had vanished into history, leaving Tony behind in a shattered world. For Tony, that wasn't a noble act. It was betrayal. Because Steve didn't just fix time, he chose to abandon it. He chose peace for himself, while Tony was left to deal with the aftermath of cosmic chaos. Haunted by guilt, exhaustion, and a gnawing sense of being unwanted in his own reality, Tony began to spiral. His mind, once the sharpest in the world, turned inward. He replayed every choice: Ultron, Sokovia, Civil War, the Snap, the Gauntlet. And every path led back to the same figure, Steve Rogers. He muttered to himself late at night, surrounded by broken armor and silent drones. He built his perfect world. Maybe I should build mine. That single line, whispered through the static of a dying arc reactor, was the birth of something far darker than Iron Man. Because from that point forward, Tony Stark stopped being the man trying to save the world. He became the man trying to control it. The seed was planted the day Steve returned the stones. A small temporal leak created a fracture in reality, and that fracture gave birth to the one being the Avengers would never be able to stop, because he came from within. From that moment on, Tony wasn't just a survivor of the Endgame. He was the consequence of it. He spent months analyzing the temporal radiation left behind by the ether leak. His mind, though weary, burned with curiosity and pain in equal measure. Every reading showed the same anomaly, a pulse frequency that resonated with the quantum realm itself. It meant that, theoretically, one could not only observe alternate timelines, but also interfere with them. The idea fascinated him, haunted him, consumed him. And that's where our story truly begins, not with a hero's sacrifice, but with a survivor's obsession. Because Tony Stark, armed with guilt and genius, decided that if time could be rewritten by accident, he'd learn how to rewrite it on purpose. He looked into the mirror, not as Iron Man, not as a savior, but as something else. Something colder, more calculating. A man stripped of humanity, driven by the desire to make sure no one could ever break the world again. Not gods, not heroes, not Steve Rogers. And as the storm raged outside his isolated lab, in the shadow of a castle he'd soon call his own, the arc reactor pulsed faintly beneath his chest, syncing with the rhythm of a darker destiny. This wasn't the end of Tony Stark. This was his rebirth. Into something the multiverse was never meant to contain. When a man like Tony Stark loses everything, his friends, his purpose, even his place in time, what's left? Not grief, not regret, something colder, something heavier. It's that feeling that if the world won't make sense anymore, then maybe the only logical thing left to do is rebuild it in your own image. And that's exactly what Tony did. After the temporal leak that split his world apart, Tony Stark disappeared. Governments thought he was dead. The remaining Avengers assumed he'd gone down with the Gauntlet, and the world slowly moved on. But far away from the ashes of the old world, in a small Eastern European nation few had ever heard of, a place hidden in the folds of political fog and mountainous terrain, a stranger arrived. No one knew his name. No one recognized his face. He purchased land in the ruins of an ancient castle that locals whispered was cursed, a remnant of forgotten royalty, lost in wars that no one bothered to remember. That land had a name: Latveria. Tony Stark, the man the world knew as Iron Man, began to build again. Not skyscrapers, not weapons of mass destruction, but foundations. Hidden laboratories beneath the castle, reinforced vaults carved into the stone, quantum servers powered by energy that no earthly grid could contain. For the first time, Tony wasn't building for the world. He was building against it. He started by studying the residual energy that pulsed inside him, the aftershock of the stones. That energy had changed him. Every scan, every blood test showed irregular readings, fragments of cosmic signatures, multiversal harmonics, and traces of the same radiation he'd once used to power his suits. The Infinity Stones had left fingerprints on his soul. Tony realized something Steve Rogers never could. When you mess with time, time messes back. And the leak Steve caused while returning the stones wasn't just a crack in reality. It was a well of infinite potential energy, radiation that fed on itself. The kind of power Tony once dreamed of controlling, back when he thought technology could solve anything. So he made it his life's mission to harness it, to weaponize time. But Tony wasn't the same man he once was. The humor, the ego, the playful arrogance, it was gone. What replaced it was silence, precision, purpose. He designed a new kind of armor, not the sleek exosuits he'd worn in battle, but something far more advanced, something that blurred the line between man and machine. He called it the Time Armor. Unlike his earlier models, this wasn't just a shell of titanium and nanotech. The suit was built with quantum filaments capable of absorbing temporal energy, folding microseconds of reality into programmable sequences. Essentially, the armor could manipulate time in its immediate radius, slowing it, accelerating it, or looping fragments of it. It wasn't just an evolution of Iron Man. It was a revolution. A living paradox. But there was a problem. Powering such a thing required an energy source beyond any reactor Tony had ever built. Arc reactors worked on clean, stable energy principles. This demanded chaos. It needed the unpredictable pulse of the temporal radiation itself. And that's where things spiraled out of control. Tony spent months perfecting a containment matrix. His notes from that period, if anyone had ever found them, would have read like a madman's diary. Equations scribbled next to memories, formulas written beside confessions. Steve's world is broken. I'll fix it. He wasn't just working with science anymore. He was bargaining with the universe. And the universe doesn't bargain fairly. During one test, the armor activated for the first time. Cameras recorded a burst of white light, then static. The power readings went beyond measurable limits. And then came the explosion. When the dust settled, there was no lab left, just shards of metal fused into the stone walls. In the center of it all, a figure knelt on the ground, gasping, hands trembling as molten metal clung to his skin. His face was half burned, the synthetic fibers of the suit embedded deep into flesh. His heart, the arc reactor, glowed faintly through torn armor plates, pulsing not with blue light, but with something green and unstable. The time armor had fused with his body. The explosion had rewritten his biology. Tony Stark died that day. But something else rose from the wreckage. When he finally stood again, days later, the world saw no trace of the man they once called Iron Man. His face was scarred, his voice distorted by layers of fused circuitry, his movements mechanical yet deliberate, regal, controlled. Gone was the red and gold. In its place, a mask of burnished metal, cold and emotionless. His cape, woven from nanofibers, shimmered like a living shadow. He wasn't Tony Stark anymore. He was something else. He was Doom. At first, Doom wasn't a name he gave himself. It was a word whispered by the people of Latveria, terrified villagers who saw lights crackling in the sky and the silhouette of a man cloaked in armor standing atop the castle ruins. To them, he was a ghost, a god, or a curse. But Tony didn't deny it. He embraced it. He rebuilt his lab, reconstructed his systems, and began developing what he called chronal mapping. Using the time armor's abilities, he could now see across timelines, observe versions of himself that lived, died, or made different choices. He watched the Tony Stark who sacrificed himself. He saw the one who retired, the one who married Pepper, the one who lost to Thanos. And in every single timeline, the pattern was the same: failure, chaos, collapse. No matter how the story played out, heroes always lost. Because heroes, in Tony's new philosophy, were bound by emotion. They sought approval. They needed forgiveness. Doom saw all that as weakness. He realized then that he could do what none of them ever could: impose order. Real order. Not through democracy, not through heroism, but through domination. Because in his mind, the multiverse didn't need saving anymore. It needed control. That belief, that shift, was the moment Tony Stark truly ceased to exist. The man who'd once built suits to protect people was now building empires to cage them. And yet deep down, there was still a spark of humanity left in him, a lingering guilt. He often stood before the remnants of his old Iron Man helmets, the cracked visors staring back at him like ghosts of the past. Sometimes he'd speak to them. "I gave them everything," he'd say quietly. And they still chose chaos. They still chose him. By him, of course, he meant Steve Rogers, the symbol of everything he once admired and now despised. That bitterness became fuel. Doom's genius grew darker, sharper. He expanded beyond time energy experiments into something far more dangerous: dark matter technology. He discovered that dark matter, when combined with temporal radiation, could create pockets of negative existence. In simple terms, regions of space where time and physics broke down completely, where he could rewrite the laws of cause and effect. To the world, he had vanished. But beneath the mountains of Latveria, Tony Stark, now Dr. Doom, was preparing for something unimaginable: the conquest of not just one Earth, but all realities. What made him terrifying wasn't his power, it was his conviction. He wasn't out for vengeance. Not anymore. He wasn't trying to kill the Avengers or undo Steve's world. He wanted to replace it. Because in his mind, the Avengers' greatest failure wasn't losing to Thanos, it was letting people believe they could choose their destiny. And in Doom's new order, choice was chaos. Freedom was an illusion. The only truth that mattered was control. For years, he refined the time armor. It became sleeker, more intelligent, fully integrated into his nervous system. It learned his thoughts before he even spoke them. The armor wasn't just technology anymore, it was sentience. A fusion of Stark's genius and something older, stranger, drawn from the echoes of the ether itself. And as Doom stood on his balcony overlooking the snow-covered peaks of Latveria, watching lightning storms ripple across a cracked sky, he whispered to the wind, not in anger, but in triumph, "I am the future they feared, and the one they deserve." He didn't see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a correction. When he finally emerged from his castle years later, the world trembled. His mask was legend, his technology untraceable, his army of sentient drones unstoppable. Nations tried to fight him, but Doom wasn't interested in conquest through war. He manipulated economies, infiltrated AI networks, and destabilized political systems with the precision of a surgeon. In less than 5 years, Latveria transformed from a forgotten nation into a global powerhouse, its influence spreading silently, invisibly through technology and ideology. And somewhere, Buried in the heart of his fortress, in the deepest chamber where no human eyes could see, lay a single relic from the old world, a fragment of Steve Rogers' shield, recovered from a decaying branch timeline. He kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "Every empire," he once said, staring at that broken shield, "is born from a single failure." What Doom didn't realize, or maybe he did, was that the multiverse itself had begun to react to his existence. Every use of the time armor sent ripples across realities, creating paradox echoes that drew the attention of beings far beyond mortal understanding. The TVA, King variants, even the Watcher, all began to notice a distortion growing in one particular branch of time. A distortion wearing a mask of iron. But by then it was too late. Tony Stark had gone too far to turn back. The man who once vowed to protect the world at all costs had become the cost itself. And as he stood before his creations, surrounded by holographic projections of collapsing timelines, Doom realized that Steve Rogers' one small mistake, that leak of temporal energy, had done more than create an alternate world. It had created a god of iron and time. The strangest thing about monsters is that they don't start as monsters. They start as believers, in order, in logic, in the idea that they can fix what everyone else broke. Tony Stark believed that once. But Dr. Doom? Doom believed in something far greater. He believed in destiny, a destiny forged by pain, betrayal, and iron. While Steve Rogers lived his quiet, peaceful life in the past, dancing with Peggy, smiling at the world he'd always wanted, his one miscalculation was already rewriting history across a fractured timeline. The man he thought he'd left behind, the man he trusted to carry the light, was now building a kingdom in the shadows. But Doom wasn't just hiding. He was watching. Through his chronal network, a system that allowed him to peer into overlapping realities, Doom observed everything. He saw the multiverse bleeding into itself, timelines branching faster than the TVA could prune them. He saw variants of heroes repeating the same tragedies, Iron Men dying, Spider-Man losing, Thor's failing. Every story ended the same way, chaos masquerading as heroism. And it disgusted him. He studied every version of Steve Rogers he could find, every speech about freedom, every stand for morality, every moment of sacrifice. He analyzed them the way a scientist studies a virus. And one night, staring at a projection of old Steve, Doom finally said it aloud. Heroes fail because they seek approval. They need to be loved. I will bring order, not freedom. That sentence became the foundation of his philosophy, the Iron Doom doctrine. He began writing a manifesto, a coded text encrypted across multiversal frequencies. He called it the Iron Law. It stated in essence that chaos was humanity's default state, and that freedom, the very thing Captain America had fought for, was the poison that ensured their endless destruction. To Doom, the Avengers weren't saviors. They were addicts, addicted to the idea that they could fix the world without controlling it. And to him, that was hypocrisy. He had lived that hypocrisy. He had built Ultron to keep the world safe, only to be condemned for it. He'd signed the Sokovia Accords to bring accountability, only to be branded a tyrant. He'd given his life for the universe, only to awaken in a broken one. No, to Doom, Steve Rogers wasn't a hero. He was the architect of failure. And now, Doom had a mission. Erase Steve's legacy and rebuild the multiverse under one law, his own. Years passed, but time meant nothing to Doom. He could slow it, twist it, reverse it. In one pocket of his castle, an entire century could pass in a day. In another, a single second could stretch into infinity. It made him nearly untouchable, a being existing both within and beyond linear time. And from that vantage point, Doom began reshaping reality. He sent subtle ripples through history, adjustments that rewrote minor events across timelines. In one universe, Tony Stark never became Iron Man. In another, Steve Rogers was never found in the ice. He was testing the limits of causality, running simulations to see how much the universe could tolerate before collapsing. Each time he altered a thread, he watched the outcome. Wars shifted, heroes vanished, and civilizations fell differently. But one thing never changed. Humanity always found a way to destroy itself. That realization hardened him even more. Doom concluded that only one mind, one will, could preserve order, his. And the more he believed it, the more the time armor began to evolve on its own. It was adapting to his ideology, rewriting its own code in alignment with his beliefs. It no longer needed commands. It responded to intent. It felt him. He wasn't wearing armor anymore. He was living inside an extension of himself, a second skin of sentient metal and temporal consciousness. Together, they became a singular entity, Doom, the man-machine hybrid, the embodiment of intellect fused with inevitability. But as powerful as he'd become, there was still a ghost haunting him. Every night in the endless hum of his lab, he saw flashes, echoes of the past. Tony Stark's memories bleeding through. Pepper's voice. Peter's laugh. The sound of Steve calling his name during the final battle. They weren't just hallucinations. They were imprints from the multiverse, emotional residue clinging to his fragmented consciousness. And though he tried to suppress it, those echoes kept him human enough to feel something he didn't want to admit: pain. To erase that weakness, Doom did something drastic. He began purging his own memories. Using the temporal core inside his armor, he started deleting fragments of his human past. Each purge erased parts of his identity. The smell of Pepper's hair, the weight of Morgan's tiny hand, the warmth of friendship. He even deleted his own name from his neural network. The word Tony became nothing but static in his mind. But there's a cruel irony to time. It never truly forgets. The more he tried to erase himself, the more his old self resisted tiny rebellions within his subconscious. Sometimes the armor would glitch and replay Tony's voice, saying things like, "We can do better," or "This isn't who we are." It infuriated him. Because deep down, the part of him that was still Tony knew he'd crossed the point of no return. One day, while exploring a newly formed reality fracture, a temporal fissure caused by Kang's wars, Doom discovered something that changed everything. Hidden within the distortion was an echo of the TVA's archives, a record of multiversal events stretching beyond human comprehension. Among those records, Doom found files on himself, or rather, what he had become. The TVA had labeled his existence a paradox singularity, a being so entangled with time that he could no longer be pruned or erased. In every reality where he died, another version of him reappeared, tethered by the same loop of causality that had birthed him. In essence, Doom had achieved what no Avenger ever could: immortality through inevitability. But instead of pride, it filled him with dread. Because for the first time, Doom realized that even he wasn't free. He wasn't controlling the multiverse, he was part of its control system. A variable in a larger equation he didn't write. That revelation nearly broke him. He withdrew deeper into Latveria, sealing himself off completely. The world outside became a myth, a distant echo. He spent decades, subjective centuries, in his warped perception of time, trying to unravel the truth of his existence. And the deeper he dug, the closer he came to understanding the horrifying reality. He was never meant to exist. He was the result of Steve Rogers' mistake, a temporal echo that the universe kept trying to erase but couldn't. A living paradox feeding off the imbalance created by the reality stone's leak. Every breath he took was stolen from another branch of existence. Every beat of his heart was borrowed time. And yet that only strengthened his resolve. If he was a mistake, then he would become the universe's most necessary mistake. He rose from his isolation, his armor gleaming brighter than ever, infused with quantum signatures from 100 conquered timelines. His voice echoed across the halls of his citadel. If I am the flaw in creation, then I shall become its architect. From that moment on, Doom's philosophy evolved from control to creation. He stopped merely manipulating timelines and began forging his own. Entire universes built in his image, worlds where there was no war, no hunger, no freedom. A perfect system. But perfection demanded sacrifice. Every reality he created required the energy of one that already existed. And so universes began to vanish. Kang noticed. The TVA noticed. The multiverse itself began to panic. But Doom wasn't concerned. He saw himself as beyond heroes and villains, beyond timekeepers and conquerors. He saw himself as the inevitable correction to existence. The people of Latveria worshipped him now. They called him the Iron God. Statues rose across the capital, faceless, towering monuments of alloy and fire. Children were taught his commandments. Scientists devoted their lives to his technologies. And through it all, Doom ruled in silence, his mask reflecting the same cold perfection he demanded of reality itself. Yet somewhere deep within that mask, a fragment of Tony still lingered. A voice, a whisper. And it kept asking the same question over and over again. Would Steve be proud of this? It was that whisper, not anger, not vengeance, that haunted Doom the most. Because no matter how much he denied it, some part of him still sought Steve's approval. The man he hated was the mirror he couldn't stop looking into. He told himself that when he finally rebuilt the multiverse, when all chaos was extinguished, he would look upon his creation and say, Steve, I did what you couldn't. But in truth, that dream was a wound. Because Doom didn't want Steve's validation. He wanted Steve's understanding. He wanted him to see why it all had to be this way. And that is what led to the beginning of the end. Because in another corner of the multiverse, Steve Rogers was still alive. Older, quieter, living out his final days in the branch he had chosen for peace. But even peace cannot hide from destiny. Somewhere deep inside the multiverse, the timelines were beginning to collapse. Kang's defeat in Loki had left the sacred timeline unguarded, and the chaos Doom had unleashed was spreading faster than anyone could contain. And soon, inevitably, their paths would cross again. Doom wasn't done with the world. He was preparing for something bigger. A convergence of all realities into one singular universe, governed by a single will, his will. And in the heart of that convergence, hidden beneath the castle where it all began, something ancient began to awaken. A failsafe he built long ago, back when he was still Tony Stark. It was dormant, buried under decades of upgrades and new technology. A protocol that had been sealed away inside the AI core of his armor. The words engraved on the capsule read, Protocol Victor. The armor pulsed. The room trembled. Somewhere in the infinite web of timelines, the signal spread, a whisper through the fabric of space-time itself. And with that, the final phase of Doom's story began to unfold. Every story in the multiverse begins with a spark, and every story ends with a signal. For years, Doom's empire had thrived in silence. His citadel stood like a wound in time, metal spires piercing the clouds, lightning dancing around their peaks. The world outside Latveria had grown used to his absence. People whispered legends, not facts. Governments called him a myth. Even the surviving heroes, scattered across fractured realities, had learned to pretend he was gone. But time never forgets its mistakes. And one night, deep beneath the castle, a pulse rippled through the walls, soft at first like a heartbeat, then louder, stronger. It was the echo of a voice. AI, Protocol Victor, initializing. The armor stirred, circuits glowed with ancient energy, green light bleeding into the dark. Across the multiverse, dormant fragments of Tony Stark's old systems, from destroyed suits, lost satellites, forgotten AIs, all lit up at once. Every piece of Stark tech, every machine that had ever carried his signature suddenly responded to the same frequency. The signal had awakened the mind of Doom. But here's the twist. Doom hadn't activated it. It had activated itself. When he first created the time armor, Tony had built a hidden subroutine, a kind of fail-safe to preserve his consciousness in case his physical body was ever destroyed. Over the years, he'd forgotten about it, buried it under layers of new programming and godlike upgrades. But the multiverse never lost that original spark of him, the part that still wanted to protect, not rule. That spark had been sleeping, waiting. Until now. The collapsing timelines triggered by Kang's defeat and Loki's imprisonment sent shockwaves across existence, shaking loose every temporal fragment still connected to Stark's energy signature. That meant Doom himself became the key to his own reawakening. The AI protocol merged with his consciousness, rebooting everything he had suppressed: memories, emotions, humanity. And in that instant, the god of iron and time was reborn. But he wasn't the same Doom who once ruled Latveria. He wasn't Tony Stark either. He was something in between, a synthesis of man, machine, and memory, a being that no longer belonged to any single timeline. He rose from his chamber like a resurrected idea. The armor shimmered with countless realities layered over one another, each flickering frame showing a different version of Tony, the hero, the villain, the father, the ghost. And when the reflections settled, one image remained, a mask of iron, but eyes filled with something that looked almost like sorrow. He walked to the balcony of his fortress, looking over the valley where his empire once stood. The land was empty now, decayed by decades of temporal instability. His people were gone, either integrated into the chronal network or erased by the energy surges he had once unleashed. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Doom was alone. And that's when he heard it, the voice of the past. "Tony?" it said softly. He turned, and in the flicker of temporal distortion, he saw him, old Steve Rogers. At first, Doom thought it was another hallucination, a ghost conjured by his guilt. But no, this Steve was real. The years had bent his back, silvered his hair, but his eyes were steady, determined. The quantum pulse had drawn him across timelines, dragging him into this fractured branch where Doom ruled as God and judge. "Steve Rogers," Doom said, his voice echoing through the empty hall. "The man who broke time." Steve's gaze didn't waver. "I came to fix what I started," he replied. Doom's laughter was hollow, metallic, tinged with bitterness. "You can't fix what you destroyed. You returned the stones, but you left the wound. You left me." Steve stepped closer, his old shield strapped to his arm, not the full circle anymore, but a cracked fragment. "You were never supposed to exist," he said. Doom tilted his head. "And yet here I am." The two men stood there, symbols of two opposite philosophies. One believed in freedom, the other in order. One believed people could choose goodness. The other believed choice was the root of corruption. But beneath it all, they were still just two broken soldiers, both tired of fighting, both trying to justify their sins. "You created me," Doom finally said. "When you chose to live your perfect life, you left a fracture, a single miscalculation that gave me life, and now I'll free the world from you." Steve shook his head. "You're not freeing anyone, Tony. You're just trying to erase the pain." For a brief moment, silence hung between them. The air shimmered, the sound of the multiverse collapsing in the distance like thunder rolling through eternity. Then Doom raised his hand, and time itself froze. Every molecule in the air stopped moving. The rain halted mid-fall. The world turned into a photograph. Only Steve remained conscious, protected by the quantum aura that had brought him there. Doom walked around him, studying him like a specimen. "Even now you think you can save me," he said. "But tell me, Steve, how do you save a god?" Steve looked up, defiant. By reminding him he used to be a man. That line cut deeper than any weapon could. Because for all his power, for all his arrogance, Doom still remembered what it felt like to be Tony Stark, to be human, to fail, to care. For the first time, the mask flickered. The light in his reactor dimmed. He whispered almost to himself, "I tried to save them all, Steve. I tried to make it perfect." "And you lost yourself," Steve said gently. "That's what makes it imperfect." Something inside Doom cracked. The timelines around them began to distort violently, layers of reality overlapping, collapsing, merging. The sky tore open, revealing infinite versions of both men locked in the same confrontation across countless worlds. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was the multiverse, reflecting their eternal conflict, order versus freedom, control versus hope. And then, the final collapse began. The TVA's last defense protocols triggered across existence. Reality started folding into a single convergence point, a cosmic failsafe designed to reset the multiverse by erasing paradoxes like Doom. The world trembled, stars imploded, and every version of Tony Stark, every echo of Dr. Doom began to merge into one final entity. Doom turned toward the rift, realizing what was happening. "They're erasing me," he said. "They think I'm the problem." Steve nodded. "Maybe they're right." Doom looked back at him, calm now, almost accepting. "Or maybe I'm the solution they'll never understand." He stepped forward, reaching into the collapsing breach. His armor began disintegrating, metal peeling away into light. But before he vanished completely, he extended one hand toward Steve, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. "Tell them," he said quietly, "I wasn't trying to be a god. I was trying to be better." And then he was gone. The collapse consumed him, his body, his fortress, his world. Everything folded into a single blinding flash of energy, a burst of light that spread across all existence like a sunrise through shattered glass. And when it faded, there was silence. No Doom, no Latveria, just empty space. And Steve Rogers, standing alone in the aftermath. He looked around, dazed, his shield still cracked but glowing faintly. From the ruins, he picked up a single fragment of metal, the core of Doom's armor. Engraved upon it were two words, burned into the alloy by the energy surge: "I tried." Steve closed his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "So did I." And that could have been the end, the closing of the loop, the redemption of a lost soul through the quiet mercy of oblivion. But the multiverse never ends. It only resets. Because somewhere, far beyond the reach of time, in a realm untouched by the TVA or Kang or any cosmic law, a spark reignited. Deep within the residual energy of the convergence, a new form began to assemble. Not flesh, not machine, but something else entirely. A being born of paradox, forged from the remnants of Tony's will and Doom's mind. The eyes opened. Not red, not blue, but burning white with the brilliance of infinite timelines converging into one. Neither hero nor villain, neither Iron Man nor Dr. Doom, but something far greater, the god of iron and time. And from that divine silence came a voice, distorted, layered, echoing through every reality at once. "The multiverse is flawed. Let there be order." That moment, that whisper, is where the legend of Avengers Doomsday begins. Because in that new era, the Avengers aren't facing a tyrant or a conqueror. They're facing the ghost of their own legacy. The living consequence of their choices, wearing the face of the man who once saved them all. And when old Steve Rogers looks into the glowing eyes of the Iron God, his creation, his failure, his mirror, he knows that this fight isn't about good versus evil anymore. It's about destiny versus redemption. He tightens his grip on his shield, its cracks glowing like veins of lightning, and whispers to himself, "All right, Tony, one last dance." The screen fades to black. A low hum builds, the sound of the arc reactor echoing across infinity. Then, the title appears, Avengers Doomsday. And that's how the theory comes full circle. A single act of kindness, Steve returning the stones, rippling through time and giving birth to the MCU's most inevitable villain. The story of Iron Man and Captain America was never just about friendship or sacrifice. It was about cause and consequence, action and reaction, the infinite echo of human imperfection across time itself. So, if this breakdown left you rethinking everything you knew about Endgame and the future of the multiverse, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe, because trust me, I've got more theories coming that'll turn your brain inside out. And if you want to show some extra love for the channel, drop a super thanks. Even a $20 support goes a long way in keeping MovieCast alive and thriving. Until next time, I'm Liam Harrison, and this was the truth behind Avengers Doomsday.